Hi, I'm Stathis, your host. Before we jump in this episode, let me introduce DevRelX. DevRelX is a hub for developer marketing and DevRel professionals. Stay home while DevRelX brings you rich content to boost your DevRel game. Access developer population insights, news, job openings, and more. Discover how to empower developers and grow communities at devrelx.com. Today's episode will start with a quote from our guest.
Developers don't care that you know until they know that you care. And I think that embodies, that empathy and developer advocacy so much.
That's a really good saying. I'm going to remember that, and I'm sure that's going to be the tagline for this podcast somehow. Welcome to Under the Hood of Developer Marketing, a podcast from /Data. I'm Jo Stitchbury, one of the senior analysts in the team, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Meiss. Jeremy, we've not met before, so I'll give you a short description of my background and then ask you to tell me about yourself. Great. So I work at /Data these days, but I have a fair amount of experience as a developer. I was an early mobile developer in the days of Scion Software and Symbian, and then I went on to work for Nokia and Sony Ericsson. Once I left mobile development, I became involved in publishing and technical writing. And that was really driven by the fact that I realised just how difficult it was as a developer to find good explanations of difficult subjects. I've worked with a number of teams in the last 15 years to grow developer portals and develop content to attract and retain them. So over to you. Could you tell us about your bio, please?
Yes. So I've been in developer relations in one capacity or another since 2007, when I started being a forum moderator at XDA Developers. But in terms of my full-on bio itself, I currently am the Director of Community and DevRel Strategy at Solace. We're an advanced event broker enabling event mesh for connected enterprises. Previously to that, I spent time at Auth0. And then also at XDA Developers, I've done some DevRel consulting. I spent 11 years at Sprint, successfully avoiding multiple layoffs until finally I got caught. And then various other firms and industries over the last 25 years. I'm a lover of all things coffee, having owned a coffee shop in a previous life. Also, love communities. I love developers. I love open source and technology. And then I am also housebroken, and I generally play well with others.
Ah, right. Well, that is always good to know. So, Jeremy, did you think you'd end up in this area? And, you mentioned that you used to run a coffee shop. Did your coffee shop owning self think that you'd end up where you are now?
I think in some ways I did. I actually owned a coffee shop as a kind of a sub-life to the existing. I was already in technology and had started to really have a love for coffee, and that while I was still working, doing technology work at Sprint, had the opportunity to purchase a coffee shop that I'd been a patron of for the previous 5 years, and went ahead and purchased it. And while I'm not, I've never been told I'm the brightest in the bunch. It probably wasn't the greatest idea in terms of long term. Or at least short term, but in the long term, it really helped me understand more and more about communities. I'd already kind of part of communities and had been doing a lot of developer work, and it just kind of helped start to connect the dots as I continued on my journey. But coffee still to this day is a passion of mine, and anytime I have the opportunity to get behind the espresso machine at a coffee shop, I relish the opportunity.
I see. And so how would you say coffee shop and building a community of patrons to buy their espresso every day or their Americano, how does that relate to people coming to a developer community? Do you see any parallels?
There definitely are parallels. I think the one that jumps to mind very quickly is you have to know your audience. And so those that are part of your community, as your developer community, you have to know, why are they coming? Why are they participating? What are their needs? What are the things that you as a running the community for them can help provide for them. And that's very much the same within a coffee shop, and really any retail for that matter. Is you're in business obviously to sell a cup of coffee, whatever it is, whether it's that order the coffee drink that takes 5 minutes for the person to order it, or it is just a simple espresso or a cup of coffee. You have to know what your audience is and what your why are they coming there, and what are the things they enjoy the most, so that you can help craft an experience that meets that.
I see. Yes, and I think I have a friend who's in brand identity and looking at personas, and I think it's very true with developer communities as well, that you kind of have personalities of the different communities, and to want to be a member of a community, that community has to reflect the kind of, not the brand as in the corporate brand, but a particular characteristic which that developer, when they come to the community, feels reflects on them. So be it an open source community because they consider themselves altruistic and helpful, or maybe it's more of like something like an SAP community where it's very much, this is me getting something done, I'm efficient, I want to save money for my company by using these tools. Is that something that you think, again, with the coffee shop, people that come in for their coffee want a particular identity reflected from it?
There is, and that's you go back to a coffee shop at the very first. Like, if the coffee's not good, you're definitely not going to go back. But if the coffee is at least passable and there's a good community or a good atmosphere, you're more willing to go back and check it out and learn more. And I think that's, as you do that, you start to, as you run a shop like that, you start to really get a feel for what keeps people once they're there. And for us, it was always finding that, we recognized that we had a lot of students that would come in. And so we wanted to make sure that, we had a lot of smaller tables so that they could sit and they could work, and that they were close to, they were close to the power outlets. But then we also knew that we had a lot of people coming in that were also, mothers and with kids. And so we wanted to have, some other spaces. And so it was creating environments that could meet the people that were coming in. And it's, taking on their atmosphere and in very much the type of, we weren't very pretentious. We tried to keep it very laid back, and that very much resonated with the patrons or the community, for lack of a better term.
I see. Yes, and I have read your blog post about your coffee shop experience, and we'll put a short link on our podcast description, right, so people listening can go to it as well. And you wrote about the signs, that the previous owner of the shop had signs everywhere telling you what you could and couldn't do, and that kind of resonated with me because I've just written a blog post about an interview I did recently with Adrian Spire, who I believe from the community, the dev community. Yep. We were talking about forums, and we were talking about how you protect your forum from trolls and how you can sort of harden it to make sure that. And I was thinking, well, you could be really hands-on in a community and really kind of enforce the rules, a bit like your coffee shop owner, or you could be completely hands-off, a bit more like, I guess, Stack Overflow or some newspaper communities. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think there's, and I definitely would agree, like you have to, you do have to figure that out. And it is a challenge. You don't want to be too heavy-handed because then you stifle conversation. And moderation is not about like stifling conversation. It's not about keeping people from saying things. It's about helping to direct and keep conversation moving in a good positive direction. And so I've spent 20 plus years. So at this point we're I've spent 25 years or more working with being part of online communities, and it very quickly can divest into a troll fest. And I've dealt with lots of trolls, especially in the, XDA developers I worked with for a while, in terms of just, variety of opinions. It's important to have a good code of conduct. There will always be you can't deal in just black and white. There's an importance of understanding that each situation is different, and it's keeping the community's trajectory and the community's health at the forefront of your decisions as it comes to dealing with trolls. Often what I found with people that are trolling, that most of the time, and there's always exceptions to this, but most of the time they are just extremely passionate about the community or about the product or whatever it is that they're talking about. And when you have a conversation with them, kind of in a private message, or you get on a Zoom call or a conference call or whatever, but you have a more direct conversation with them and learn about why they're so passionate. Often they really love the product and they want to see it go a certain direction. And so those are opportunities for you as a community manager and moderator to really build that relationship and to help direct them and say, hey, we appreciate you having that voice and the passion you have. That does, how you've in this situation responded keeps others from wanting to be a part. And by doing that, you're negatively affecting the community. And so what we'd like you to do is still be involved and still be passionate, but help to direct a conversation instead of stifling it with your comments. And I've seen that work really well. I've also seen it blow up. And then you're like, okay, then this is probably not the place for you. But it takes building a relationship. And that's what I enjoy so much about communities and developer communities in particular, is just it's building those relationships and getting to know each person. And the challenge is always to take and help mold a community based on the people that are a part of it. And it's people, so it's the internet, so that means at any point a dumpster fire can happen.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me, because you're obviously reaching out to people to get to know them, and you're as you say, going on calls with them or exchanging messages, you're thinking very much about having people coming to your community rather than devolving it to Reddit or Stack Overflow. These are people that really are involved, as opposed to just some random that's trolling for the sake of it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that. And again, it comes back to knowing why your community exists and who it exists for. And Reddit has its place. I hate and love Reddit at the same time. Stack Overflow is the same thing. Like they have a purpose. I think one of the challenges that Stack Overflow has, and communities, especially kind of technical brand communities today, have the exact same problem, is that it used to be 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, that you could ask a question and there would be people that would love to jump in and help and answer those questions and help build that community and contribute. And then it slowly kind of happened to where somebody asks a question and maybe it's been asked 2 times, 10 times, 100 times before. And we've lost in some ways a desire to kind of help self-serve to where people really search. And also I think searching as a skill is also something that some people have and others don't. But you tend to get people now that jump and say, well, that's been answered 25 times before, I'm not going to answer it. And I think that's a challenge. And that's and then you get people, after they've been jumped, after their hand's been bitten a number of times, they're not going to put themselves into that environment. And so it's very much a challenge. And you definitely see that with the Reddits and with the Stack Overflows, and with smaller brand communities, you do see it as well. But it does come back to how are you forming the community, what does it exist for, your code of conduct, and just making sure that everybody contributes and treats everyone with respect.
Yeah, plays nicely. Yeah. You mentioned challenges there, and that is a truly large challenge. What would you say has been your biggest challenge in the 20 years or so that you've been working in online communities?
Well, so a vast portion of that was as just members of the community. I think as I've been doing, more in the moderation staff of different communities over the last 12 years, I think the biggest challenge has just been um, putting aside your personal, I don't want to say putting aside your personal feelings, because it is important to have those personal feelings, but to maybe grow a thicker skin and recognize that not everybody speaks in a way that lifts others up, and to not take everything so personal. That is a challenge. And I've developed the skill, and then sometimes I go, maybe I didn't develop it enough. Or I still haven't developed. Like it's there. It comes and goes, but I think that's a challenge, just in the personal relationships and in personal interactions that you have. Is always trying to have that thick skin and not let something get to you. But I think it's also a challenge. The challenge that goes along with that is having a good support network around you, both within the community and within other communities, and then offline as well, that you can go to, and that you can voice your feelings, and how what's happening, and really kind of vent, and they know you're venting, and they do the same for you, and it helps to get it off, so that you don't take that out on either your loved ones or the people that are in the community. And I'm one of the developer relations community that I'm a part of. We have a weekly kind of a Zoom call that's open for anyone in the community to join, and a friend NDA that it is what's said there stays there, and we share what we're struggling with, or what we're not, and but it's an open space that we can just chat, and we can kind of let things off our chest, and know that there's others in that community that feel the same way. And I think that's important, and it's taken a while to kind of get to that spot, to know that's what I need. And I think it's important for anyone that's working in communities, especially online communities, but developer communities and developer relations, to just have safe spaces that they can be themselves, and know that others care, and know that others are experiencing the same thing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting lesson learned, that having a thick skin is one thing, but it's always going to get to you at some level, and you've just got to find a way to deal with it. And you mentioned about the fact that a lot of this is online community specific, because conversation online is always much more difficult to gauge the nuance of what someone's saying, the tone. There's the language, sometimes the language barrier, cultural barriers about what you can and can't say. Do you think once you've met people at events that your relationship with them changes for the better, so you've got a better understanding? So would you say events, face-to-face events, are important?
Absolutely. So when I spent years with XDA developers, had built a lot of relationships with people in that community over, so I joined that community in 2007, and had built a lot of community relationships, but it was all online. And then in 2013, I created a community, I created a conference that wanted to bring, those that were in the community, bring them to an offline setting where they could learn and share and build more, build some new relationships and grow. And it was fascinating to see people that were, and of course I met people that I had not seen in real life, but I become really good friends with online. And so that took that relationship to a deeper level, and grew it. But then it also seen other people that had that same experience, really kind of showed me the importance of offline as well as online. And ended up doing that conference twice. Once was in the UK, and the other was in the US. And it repeatedly reinforced to me the importance of that. And then as I've gone to events and spoken at events and met people that, that again have mostly, had conversations with online, again, it continuously reinforces that. And I have some fantastic relationships right now with people in the DevRel community that has come out of the fact that we've been able to sit and share a meal together or have a drink or just go to a conference together. And it's really, really built that up.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we had Catherine Miller recently on the pod talking about events. And I mean, she spoke at length about, the value that you get from learning things, from meeting product managers. But I think just meeting each other and building relationships so that when you're back at your desk and you're seeing questions being asked, you know what's coming behind that. You know what people have been stuck on, what they're working on. It makes a huge difference to the way that you interact. Absolutely. Yes. The value as a developer comes, I would say, at least half for going to the conference is meeting other developers as opposed to just getting the knowledge that you can get. I haven't
Absolutely.
Really to many recently, but I went to WWDC a couple of times, and it was just amazing to be able to interact with people doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that, and it also, there is something about once you can put a face, an actual physical body to the person that you've been talking online with, it makes it personal. And by doing that, it also it changes your perceptions, and it also kind of makes it a lot easier to relate, but it also makes it a lot harder as long as the interaction was good. It makes it changes the interaction, and I've seen that change the interaction for good.
So you've obviously been in the communities a long time. What is it that you particularly love about developer relations and developer marketing?
So I think the thing that I love the most about developer relations is the relationships. I think advocacy and developer advocacy and developer evangelism and the different pieces that all entail into that. I love the interactions. I love helping connect people to the information that they're looking for, helping make others successful. And I think that's the part of being a developer advocate is really helping to convey both internally and externally what people are feeling, and be that advocate for the developer back to the company. I think is just exciting, and I think brings a lot of purpose to what I do, and I think that really drives me to continue to to be a part of that, and to spend this as my career, and it's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I absolutely echo a lot of that. The question that I'd like to ask you is, I'm technical, you're technical, and we work in developer marketing, but if somebody's listening that's maybe working in a marketing team, or maybe they're a student and they're thinking this would be an interesting area to go in, how much technical expertise do you really need to work in developer relations or developer marketing?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's one that we continuously, within the developer relations field, have conversations around. And there's a lot of opposing opinions. My personal opinion is you don't have to be in a technical role. I do feel like you do have to have at least some technical ability, but it doesn't have to be in the sense of you've worked at some tech startup, or that you were a COBOL developer, or that you're a accomplished JavaScript developer. I haven't done day-to-day development in probably 10 years now, but I am technical. I spent years working in the technical field. I was doing sysadmin and network admin for a ISP back in the mid 90s. I have a technical background, but I know some fantastic developer advocates and developer evangelists who, they don't come from a traditional tech background. One of them, a great friend, was a scientist, cancer scientist. There was another one who was a theater major. You don't have to fit into this box of being an engineer, because generally chances are you're not going to be spending any time engineering, or if you are, it's going to be a very small set as you're working on a specific problem. But I think you do need to have a technical aptitude to be able to relate what your developer audience has and the questions that they have and the concerns and the challenges, be able to relate that back to the development teams like engineering and product, and then so that you can actually explain to them what's happening, but then be able to then convert that back to the audience and let them know what's happening. And I think you need to have the ability to explain some technical concepts. But in terms of being an actual engineer, I know one company out there is very adamant that you have to be an engineer at a full level. You need to be able to do the same day-to-day job of an engineer in the company in order to be a developer advocate. And I just don't see that. And I've seen that time and time again, companies or developer advocates who are fantastic at their job, who don't fit that construct. I think it does differ depending on the company and what their direction is and what their product is. But for the most part, I don't think you have to be a full technical person as much as you need to have a technical aptitude.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of looking at it, and it comes again to empathy, really, doesn't it? Is being able to talk to the different audiences. So you can talk with a developer, and you can talk with an engineering team, and you can translate between them. And as long as you've got a systematic approach to the technical side of things, and you can relay information accurately, and you've got the confidence that you're moving in a technical world, but you may not have the background. Then I think you'll do really well. I know, I'm not by training a software engineer. I have a degree in chemistry, and when I first moved into C++ development, I found it difficult to, these days it's called imposter syndrome. I felt very much out of place, like I didn't know anything. But I think the thing is that as long as you're eager to learn and you have that kind of sense that I can be confident in what I'm doing, as long as I'm truthful and systematic in how I reflect my company and how I argue for the developer, so the two faces of relations, then I think anybody could do it that has the empathy and the aptitude.
Yeah, and I think that kind of mirrors my or comes out of my journey into developer relations, is that I in some ways I kind of fell into it, but throughout, even in my youth, I was always somebody that could relate technical information to the non-technical, and then relate the non-technical back to the technical. And so I consistently kind of found myself as that person who would get called into meetings or get called into projects to help be that advocate for the customer, whether it was an internal customer or the external customer. And in fact, one of my early jobs, I was thinking about this earlier today, was when I was at Hallmark Cards back in the late 90s, was technical liaison. And looking back, that definitely was a developer relations job. And it, I kind of stood in between the customer and the developer teams to make sure that what they were building was what the customer wanted, and take all of that information about. And so I think it's, being able to relate that stuff. And I think it's extremely powerful for somebody in developer relations. And so if you're out there, and relating to the overall question here, if you're out there and you're looking to get into developer relations, or it seems like something you really want to, but you don't know that you know the answer to questions, that's okay. Being able to say, when somebody asks, hey, how does this work? Or I'm having a problem here, what do I do? Being able to say, I don't know, but I will go find out. Let me get your information so that I can come back to you with that info. Powerful. And people hear that, and they're okay with you saying, I don't know, but that you're going to go find out.
Yeah, I think it comes back down to, having the confidence to say, it's something I don't know, having the confidence to deal with the fact that you don't know something, which is often better when you're coming from outside than when you're supposed to be the expert. So, it's clear that you won't know everything because you weren't trained in that. You didn't do a degree in somebody's special API. So it's perfectly okay for you to go, I don't know that, I'll go ask the developer. But it's having the confidence to do that and tell yourself that it's all right. Because often you'll find that the person that's asking will be far happier about you saying that than you would be.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Now, we'll be talking about developer advocacy. And I wanted to move on. I have heard word that you are a big Doctor Who fan, as am I and everyone in my family. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the Doctor. I'm guessing that most people listening probably do know about the Doctor, the Time Lord.
If they don't, they should go and find it out really quickly.
Yeah, go and find it out and watch some on Netflix. I'm thinking of Doctor Who, or rather the Doctor, as a developer advocate. Now, I think in some ways he's a really good advocate because he's connecting people from all kinds of walks of life, not just on Earth, not just humans, and convincing them to work together to save a planet or save themselves or whatever. He's cementing bonds between people, often because they're infuriated with him and they're working together to, solve a problem and get him out of their sight. But do you think he's also perhaps somewhat awful in that he's never very good at explaining things and he belittles them? And I don't know. What are your thoughts? I'm conflicted. I can't work out whether he's a good or a bad advocate.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating case study. I'm going to have to explore that on a more personal level at some point. I think the Doctor is a good example of an advocate in the sense that you have in a storyline that continuously repeats itself is that Earth doesn't have smallest or even an iota of an idea of how big the universe is. And they don't understand that, change is coming and that, there are other life forms out in the universe that wish them ill, some that wish them good. And they're completely clueless. And so a theme that continuously echoes, from the Doctor to the rest of the universe is that Earth is protected. And that he is there for Earth. And I think he's advocating, I think you definitely can draw that parallel, that he's advocating for Earth and for humans, as flawed as we are, that they have ultimately good at heart and that he's there for them. But I think the other side of that, kind of the dark side as well, is that you're right. He takes too much on himself. And as we've seen in, especially the last few seasons and the last couple Doctors, they've really explored this idea of, I would say it's even a burnout of that you just, you get burnout. And within developer relations, burnout it's a real thing because we tend to not take care of ourselves very well. Especially if we are, advocating for others, we're taking on a lot of their concerns and a lot of their frustrations, and we have to take that back to, product and to engineering and to different areas of the company, and that requires a little bit of ourselves each time. And if you don't, and then we're traveling, and then we're spending. I know some that spend weeks and a month away at a time. And constantly hopping on, you're across every time zone, and that takes a toll. And eventually, your body says, "Okay, if you're not going to take this on yourself, I'm going to make sure you take it on yourself." And then you have that crash, and you have to build yourself back up and start back over. And I think that we've seen that with the Doctor, that he just took him took so much on himself that now he gets burnt out and can't be the advocate like he should.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I think that's really explored that. And it's very real to what it really is within developer relations, is that, burnout is real. And while we do advocate for the developer and for the people in our community, we do have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And we
So
can't do it alone.
Sorry.
We have to also be looking for people that we can bring along to do that for us and to help us, and to, I firmly believe leadership is about replacing yourself, and that you should be having one or two people on your team that you're building into them, that they will replace you and you will go do something else. And I think that's very much within developer advocacy, is that you need to be finding people within the community and within even your organization that you can replicate yourself, so that you're not the only one doing it, and that you can give them the tools necessary to do it as well.
So you're teaching someone to fish rather than giving them the fish. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I was just going to go back and say, this developer advocates, you're traveling in space and time, and you need to regenerate every so often. I think there's a thesis in this somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. I'm gonna have to explore that a little bit more.
Yes, and I think certainly in the last series that where we've had in the UK, at least, I don't know if you've got around to watching the latest series, that we now have a lady doctor, and the cast of characters that travel with her has been very much about advising her and having different skill sets, which I think it's been really quite interesting to see that she's relied on them perhaps more than other doctors have in the past to negotiate. There was one particular one where somebody was showing great empathy, and you think, well, actually, the doctor doesn't always have that empathy, not with other humans anyway.
Yep.
And the doctor was taught something by the companion, which was fascinating.
Yeah, empathy is one thing that I think is extremely important for somebody in developer relations, especially for developer advocate. And I've seen people. I've worked with people in marketing over the years, in other areas of the companies that interface with developers that have no empathy, and it shows. It shows in their interactions with others in the company, and within the community. And being empathetic is very much, it's difficult. And there's been some discussion in our community of, is it something that is a skill you can learn, or is it something that is inherent to who you are, and that you can learn it, but you can't be proficient in it, and that it's you know what I mean? Like, there's just a back and forth of really trying to understand this, because empathy is so important, and some people have it more than others. And I one saying that I like to repeat is, developers don't care that you know until they know that you care. And I think that embodies, that empathy and developer advocacy so much.
That's a really good saying. I'm going to remember that, and I'm sure that's going to be the tagline for this podcast somehow. Yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's this is really why I ended up in this area. As I mentioned earlier, it's because I felt that with Symbian C++, which had been sort of created before C++ was fully standardized, and it was designed for a very low memory, low power device. So everything was preserving as much as it possibly could. It was, it was a bare bones system, and the flavor of C++ had been developed with that in mind. And it made it very difficult to use unless you were, one of the insiders, one of the gifted few. And the people that had created it were very smart people, but with no empathy really. And it was just like, well, you don't understand it, then you must be an idiot, as opposed to, well, why don't I explain it to you? So I felt that, we needed to write this down properly, and I wrote a book about it. And that's, I think, how I ended up in this field. It was so satisfying But yeah, I think empathy, I wouldn't say I'm always empathetic in everyday life. I'm sure my son would agree with me, but certainly when it comes to lack of understanding of difficult, complex areas, then yeah, absolutely. And I think the doctor struggles with this somewhat because the doctor, of course, is so much more intelligent than us puny humans. But
and he's a little older.
yes, yes,
He's seen a little bit more, and he's seen the challenges that can come in, and he's probably seen things repeated multiple times over the years, and so yeah, I think you kind of eventually you have to struggle with that. I think in just the daily life too, of that, just because that question's been asked before, or that developer, even that developer themselves has struggled with this before, does not mean that they don't deserve empathy and don't deserve you to interact with them on their level. And that's always a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. So moving on slightly, talking about having seen a lot, as I'm sure you have. You've seen a number of communities, you've worked with them, and you probably visit them in your own, development practice. What would you say makes a community succeed, and perhaps more importantly, what can cause a community to fail? Because I mean, I'm speaking from experience. I've worked in a number of communities that are no longer with us. I've got my own thoughts on why they've failed, but what would you say would really cause the difference between success and failure?
Goodness, that's a great question. I think one of the things that can make a community successful, sometimes it is very much a tipping point, things that could be really difficult, and then all of a sudden there's clarity, and boom, that's what does it. I don't want to say that it's that it is left to chance, but one of the things about communities, often you don't recognize that there's a community until all of a sudden, oh, here's a community that's popped up and we didn't even plan for it. I've seen that happen in a variety of things, but I think planning is extremely important to make it successful. And not in the sense of like a full-on business plan, but I think it's as you're creating a community, or as you're seeking to maybe revitalize one, is really kind of sit down and go over a plan and figure out what works. What are you trying to do? Who are you trying to meet with? What needs are you trying to fulfill, and who are the people, and who's going to staff it? All those things you really kind of have to lay out the goals and such. I think it's important to get feedback, whether it's an existing community and you're trying to revitalize it, or those that it's kind of a new community. Getting feedback from the people that are in that target community on what their needs are is important before you kind of go on full launch. Defining what it looks like to be successful, which kind of goes along with those goals that you've set, is understanding, okay, so we know that it's going to be successful because we've done X or Y, and that's important. I think when a community isn't successful is they've not defined what it means to be success, and they also don't have somebody that's going to own those specific pieces. So I think that's kind of that flip side. I think any of these, if you don't do them, I think that's a recipe for failure. I've seen communities that none of this happened and they still grew. It doesn't mean that it's, there is no one size fits all. We see this in developer relations where a lot of companies come in and they say, hey, we see that, Microsoft and their cloud advocacy team, or Google and their cloud team, or AWS or Twilio, or any of these other big companies that have really done a great job with developer relations, we're going to do what they've done, and we're going to look just like them. And it just doesn't work because every community is different. What excites me about communities is that it's just like DNA. Like, they each have their own DNA, and you have to understand what that makeup of your community is and what's going to work. There's certainly principles that work across the board, but it is not just something that you can follow the same recipe. There's no cookie cutter success. Other than, I would say, you have to have a good plan.
Yeah, I know, I completely agree. And I think you really need to understand your audience, your potential audience, we're not necessarily talking about dividing into personas and segments, although I do believe that that's important, and that's something else that we'll talk about in a later podcast. But just what are the problems that your audience are likely to be trying to solve, and what are the problems that they're going to run into? Because I think the communities that I've worked with in the past have been very much like, this is what we want you to do. But that's not necessarily what the audience want to do for themselves. They know what they want, and you've got to provide them with the materials and the support to do that. And just because you want to emphasize one particular thing doesn't necessarily mean that they're interested in that, or our uptake's going to be particularly strong.
Yep.
Okay, then. Well, I think we're getting to the point of wrapping up, but something that we always talk about on the pod towards the end of the conversation is trends. And I'd just like to ask you what you think the hottest trend in developer marketing will be in the next year or so.
I think within developer marketing is getting more personal. I think we're going to have to see that. And I think that's a trend that I think I've started to see, definitely within, my company, as we start to understand that we have to be a little bit more personal when it comes to the developer marketing side. Developer relations by itself has to be personal, but marketing's kind of always been this kind of view of shots on goal, and let's try and get as many things out there and something will resonate. I think that's going to have to change, especially within developer marketing. Like, there's some marketing that works with, but developers, and I like to use this example of, it used to be back in the mid to late 90s, whenever you heard "you've got mail," you had this collective, like, warm fuzzy feeling, because I got an email and I'm going to go read it, and you would read it, and it was joy, absolute joy. Now whenever you hear that little ding on your phone or on your computer or whatever it is that is an email, there's a general sense of dread of, I got another email. And there's because there's there's the whole thing of like, hey, we got to get to inbox zero. Like, that I think personifies so much of this, how much we hate the fact that we have email that we haven't read, and it just drains us. And developers don't like email. They just don't. And so I think there's a change in how the marketing towards developers, I think it's going to have to become more personal and more relational than it has been in the last, X number of years. And I think that's one trend that I'm starting to see or starting to feel. I don't know that I have a full, look into that, but I have a feeling that that's starting to change.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think that's a very interesting take on it, and it's just a question of then how granular you can be with your personal marketing, and I guess that will depend very much on the community and the size and again the segments. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Jeremy. That's been a really interesting talk. We've covered Time Lords and coffee and developer advocacy.
That's right.
And everything in between.
That's right. Well, it's been great.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the listener. Thanks for listening to Under the Hood of Developer Marketing, a podcast devoted to developer marketing and developer relations. If you want to listen to other episodes, you could subscribe at developermarketingpodcast.com or follow us on Twitter at /datahq for regular updates.